Hey, what's up, everybody? So, Silicon Era has posted a interview with Tetsuya Nomura. It says Tetsuya Nomura Final Fantasy VII Remake interview reveals new game details. So, a lot of you all have been asking me to talk about this interview he did and the subsequent things that have also come out about it. So, I'm just going to lump it all into one video, my take on it, all that kind of stuff. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please subscribe to the channel and like the video if you're into it. So, let's just get right into the interview. It's a lot of good points in here. I already skimmed it over real quick and we'll talk about it. It says, in an interview with Famitsu, Final Fantasy VII Remake director Tetsuya Nomura revealed some key information about the upcoming games in the franchise. He explained each game's concept, revealed some details surrounding Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade's characters and bosses, and how Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis will tie all of the games together. He also revealed that he's planning on passing the title of director onto Naoki Hamaguchi from the next installment onwards. Alright, so I think this is just the director change is probably a good idea, and we'll keep reading, but it's not a knock on Nomura in any way, but I'll explain why here in a second. Nomura is currently the director of Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis, The First Soldier, and Intergrade. Nomura added that he will continue to stay on as a creative director for any games involving the Final Fantasy VII franchise, and that this will not change how involved he will be with the future titles. Here are some highlights from the Famitsu interview. Okay, point number 1 here, it says, Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis will be a compilation game that ties together all of the events from the Final Fantasy VII games, including the events of the upcoming Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier. That's interesting. Each title in the Final Fantasy VII storyline will get its own episodic release. This includes the events of The First Soldier, with scenarios written by Kazushige Nojima. Okay, so look, we knew Nojima would have a hand in this. We didn't really know what the first soldier would be, so I'm kind of wondering if, well, okay, let's keep reading. Next point. Since it's set before the founding of Soldier, players will also get to see the early days of a certain legendary hero. Okay, cool. This is what I was curious about. So, I think Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier will be its own weird, wacky Fortnite cash grab from Square Enix, right? They can do what they want to. Go make your money. Whatever. You know, I'm not trying to be some kind of gaming purist. Hey, go make your money. Go get that money. But it's basically Fortnite with what looks like Crisis Core skins, like in 1080p. But this is interesting, because it says Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier will also be a part of Ever Crisis, an episodic release of Ever Crisis, which doesn't come out until next year. This game comes out this year. So I think what they're saying is there's going to be story elements from the story elements from The First Soldier, not the Battle Royale aspect of it, but the story elements of that game are going to be an episodic release in the Ever Crisis compilation, which still holds true to the theory, and this isn't grasping at straws, I'm just reading what they're saying right here. I still think the story of Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier is going to be the origins of Sephiroth. I think it's going to be about Sephiroth. Now, yes, Sephiroth's like, 27 or something like that in the main storyline of Final Fantasy VII, but was he 27 when he disappeared 5 years ago in the timeline, or was he 27 in the current storyline? I don't think Sephiroth is 22 years old in Nibelheim. I think he's 27. So in the current storyline, it would be 32 years old. So if you do the math on it, this would take Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier to about where Sephiroth's 2 years old. If that timeline and math holds up. I could be wrong about that, but that's just kind of what I'm thinking, right? So I had originally thought this was something about Sephiroth, like a lot of people did. It wasn't just me, a lot of people did. And it looks like that could still be the case. So I'm not as disappointed about The First Soldier as I was before I read this. I'm not interested in the Battle Royale game at all. But if it's a story episodic release it's a different version of it for the Ever Crisis, I'm in for that. Next point. Character voices for Ever Crisis are still under consideration. I am working on so many titles and have so many recording sessions scheduled that I'm trying to avoid adding new ones. We've even added We've even considered doing away with character voices entirely, but felt they may be necessary during battles. Regardless, if we were to add them, they would be minimal. Okay. So for the Ever Crisis stuff, it looks like it's going to play like the old PS1 game, right? But obviously looking better and with better graphics and stuff. I do think you have to add vocals for like combat stuff or whatever. But yeah, if you just want to make it like reading it, text boxes and stuff, I'm cool with that. That's old school. Throw it back, do whatever you want. You don't necessarily need performances for that, right? Because it is kind of a throwback to the old game. The old game had no voice in it. No voice in it. Except for some of the choir parts and the music or whatever. But there is like, even in the cutscenes, there is no voice. No voice at all. Next point. I'm working on more titles now than I've ever worked on before. I'm starting to see some improvements that can be made, and since Final Fantasy VII Remake has already had a solid release, Hamaguchi, who was co-director on Remake, which a lot of us know that, will be the director for the next installment. I will still stay on as creative director for any Final Fantasy VII related titles, and this will not change how much involvement I have with the titles. Alright, so dig it. Look. I said earlier this is a good idea, this is why, right? Tetsuya Nomura is a brilliant mind, has endless creativity and imagination, but you need people to reel you in when you're like that. You like having him as director on this going forward. I feel like sometimes some ideas, there's a reason some ideas hit the cutting room floor, right? To use a film term, because you have to work on your flow. The story has to flow. The game has to flow. The animation, the movie, whatever you're working on, it has to have a certain flow to it. You can't be hitting people with exposition. You can't be hitting people with like all these ethereal concepts and weird ideas all at once and in totality, because you're going to lose people. And this game, as much as I loved it, it lost a lot of people, right? I understand. I'm not going to sit here and bash them for hate. If you didn't like it, you didn't like it, and I understand why you didn't like it. I loved it. I thought it was great, but I can see why people didn't like it for different reasons. So this is a great idea. The stuff that Hamaguchi worked on was great, and I'm expecting nothing less than something great. Now, having Tetsuya Nomura on as a creative director for the game moving forward, I think that's a fantastic idea. It's a great idea because he's still bringing his ideas and his concepts to the table. He's letting the director, co-director, and whatever team he has with him, Hamaguchi that is, and Kitase and all those guys, work in these concepts and see what works, what doesn't work, and Tetsuya Nomura being hands-off as far as directorial roles go. I think that's a great idea, and you've got Nojima in the room, and you all know how I feel about Nojima. Man's a rock star. Man's a rock star. He wrote all of this. Like, he wrote this, all came from his mind. He wrote the scenario. This is all him. Without him, there is no Nibelheim incident. There is no Sephiroth or anything like that. He wrote all these characters to be as legendary as they are. And so I think that's a good idea. That's a great move. I think it'll be just fine moving forward. Next point. We decided on VICE as the antagonist for Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade because we wanted a strong, intimidating alternative to Sephiroth. This will be the first game where Cloud and VICE will fight, something that I personally wanted to see ever since the PS4 release. Okay. I need to think further about that. Next point. There will also be a boss fight in Yuffie's storyline that is different from VICE in the new episode. Okay, so that's what... Okay, so those 2 points together. So, okay, that right there shoots down the idea that VICE is just a combat simulator thing. He's not. He might be in the combat simulator, which I think he is, but he is like I said in the video where I broke down the trailer, he's like this lawnmower man, Agent Smith, digital bad guy, right? He can go into the digital realm and all this kind of stuff. So what if he corrupts the AI? What if he has a big boss fight? Now, that's another thing. Are they going to add in a middle chapter somehow to where, because there's no spot in the game in Final Fantasy VII Remake for Cloud to, where Cloud goes off on a mission to solve some kind of AI corruption problem or something like that, right? So they're going to have to write something new in. This might be... And he's not a boss in Yuffie's storyline. It specifically said he wanted something for Cloud to fight and a strong antagonistic alternative to Sephiroth. Intergrade might be almost like a completely new game. That's the vibe I'm getting from this. It's like there's more than just pretty textures and a Yuffie scenario going into this. Seems like there's a lot more going into this than that. That's interesting. This is really interesting. I'm really kind of wondering what that could be now. I feel like there's a lot more to this game than what they told us in that little release they put out. I think there's a lot more. Reading this, it makes me think there's a lot more to it. Next point. The title Intergrade means middle ground. Was chosen to symbolize its position between Remake and the next installment, which they're not calling Remake Part 2. We've talked about that. Marketing matters. Marketing matters. Marketing matters. Learn about your marketing. Then put some comments in there. Was chosen to symbolize its position between Remake and the next installment. It's also an homage to Final Fantasy VII International, the international release that added some tweaks and improvements to the game. Alright, so I've always wanted to play that international release. I don't think we ever got it here in the States. I don't think we did. And if we did, I missed it. So, but yeah, I'm excited. So it says Square Enix announced Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis, The First Soldier, Remake, Intergrade, and at the PlayStation State of Play event. Both Ever Crisis and First Soldier will be available on iOS and Android devices. While the Final Fantasy VII Remake port will come to PS5 on June 10th, 2021, the First Soldier will release in 2021, and Ever Crisis is slated for a release in 2022. Slated for a release in 2022, not confirmed. First Soldier is confirmed for toward the end of this year. Ever Crisis is not confirmed for 2022. It's slated for release in 2022, which means it'll probably hit it, but there's a possibility it may not hit it. And that's big because it said the First Soldier is going to have an episodic release in Ever Crisis. So this game, The First Soldier, is not a part of the Ever Crisis compilation. It will be something else. It will probably be the story of Sephiroth, like I speculated, like a lot of us speculated, right? It's the First Soldier in Ever Crisis will be the story of Sephiroth. Mark it down. I'm putting that in as a lock. That is going to be the story, the backstory of Sephiroth. Now, I've seen some reports online where people are saying that Nojima wrote extra stuff for compilation of or Ever Crisis, and he's written extra scenarios for Ever Crisis. And that he wrote Sephiroth's backstory for Ever Crisis. And I think they're all just assuming that it's going to be worked into the Final Fantasy VII release of Ever Crisis. I don't think that's true. I think it's going to be the First Soldier's episode for Ever Crisis. As far as the episodic releases, I'm not really sure how they plan to handle that, because there is a lot of content to cover, right? Especially for Final Fantasy VII, the original game. And then you got Crisis Core, which is a pretty good sized game, right? And then you've got Advent Children. You're going to have to rewrite a lot of that to make it a game. You're going to have to rewrite a lot of that. Give us, what I would love to see with Advent Children, the Ever Crisis Advent Children, is just touch on the other characters. Give us some sections where you play as them and we see what they've been up to, WRO, or WOR, whatever it is, Reeves thing, and then what Barrett's doing, the work he's doing, Sid, Vince, what's everybody been doing? And then we're going to get the Dirge of Cerberus, which that needs some tweaking. That needs some tweaking for sure. But I'm excited. But yeah, I still think the First Soldier is going to be the story of Sephiroth. I really do. It takes place 30 years before Final Fantasy VII. He was 27 when he disappeared 5 years previous to the beginning of the timeline. That would make him 32 in Final Fantasy VII. He would be 2 years old when that game starts. So I think that math adds up, right? So anyway, we'll talk more about this here in a little bit. I just wanted to get this initial knee-jerk kind of reaction to this out there. But let me know what you all think. I'm excited for all this stuff coming out, because it means they're going to be bleeding a little bit out here and there because there's so much coming. There's so much coming. I think when we get closer to Intergrade, they're going to want to hype that release up. And like I said, I think Intergrade is going to be a lot more than what we think, than what they showed in that presentation. I think we're going to get a lot more with that. But anyway, y'all have a great night. Be good to each other. Stay safe out there and keep rocking. I will see you all in the next video.